The strange thing about love is that it never arrives the way we imagine it will. It doesn't knock politely, it doesn't announce itself with certainty, and it never asks if we are ready. It simply appears, quietly, sometimes in the middle of an ordinary afternoon when the light is falling just a little differently through the window, and suddenly you realize your entire life is about to shift in a direction you did not plan for. And I want you to stay with me here, because what I am about to share is not just about my son, not just about a woman standing at a crossroads, but about the invisible thread that ties two people together long before they even meet. And right now, I need you to imagine something very specific. Imagine you are sitting in your room, or perhaps by a window where the world outside feels a little too loud and a little too far away. And then imagine me telling you, very softly, that there is not much time left. Only 5 minutes. Not to scare you, but to prepare you. Because life has a way of arriving suddenly when it decides you are finally ready for something you have been avoiding your whole life. And I wonder if you already feel it in your chest, that strange tightening, as if something unseen is about to change everything. Before we go any deeper, just stay with me gently. If this story finds its way into your heart, take a moment to like this video, not for me, but for the quiet connection between strangers who understand emotion without needing to explain it. Subscribe if you believe love still deserves time in this fast world. Tell me softly where you are watching from, and what time it is where you are sitting right now, because I always find it fascinating how love exists in different time zones, yet feels exactly the same. And if someone you love comes to your mind while listening, share this with them, without saying why, because some feelings do not need explanation. Now, let me return to you. There is something about mothers that people misunderstand. They think we only see our children as they are now, but in truth, we see every version of them at once. The boy they were when they first fell and cried without understanding why pain exists. The young man they became when the world began to test them in ways no one prepared them for. And the version of them still forming, in places even they cannot yet see. That is why I cannot speak about my son without also speaking about time itself. Because time changes people, but love, real love, reveals them. And I have watched him grow in a world that rarely pauses to understand him. A world that admires success, but rarely protects the soul behind it. And yet, despite everything, there is still a part of him that believes in something very pure. Something that has not been replaced by ambition or noise or expectation. He still believes in love that is real. Not convenient, not temporary, not transactional, but real. And that is why I am here with you now. Because when a man carries that kind of heart into the world, the woman who meets him must not just be beautiful in appearance, but steady in spirit. Do you understand what I mean when I say steady? I mean someone who does not panic when life becomes unpredictable, someone who does not leave when emotions become complicated, someone who does not turn love into a negotiation every time things become difficult. And I ask you something very gently. Have you ever been that woman before? Or have you only been asked to become her after it was already too late? I think about this often, because I know what is coming. There is a moment, very soon, when my son will arrive. Not as a child needing permission, but as a man making a decision. And when that moment comes, everything you think you understand about timing, control, and emotional readiness will feel very small compared to the weight of what is actually happening. And I want you to be honest with yourself right now, in a way no one else can hear. If someone were to stand in front of you today and say, "Pack your bag, we're leaving," would your heart recognize safety, or would it recognize fear? Because love always reveals that difference. And I am not asking you to be perfect. I am not asking you to be without past, without scars, without memory. I am only asking you to be honest enough to know whether your heart still believes in staying when things are not easy. My son does not need perfection. He has never needed perfection. What he needs is truth. A kind of truth that does not disappear when pressure enters the room. A kind of truth that does not collapse when silence becomes uncomfortable. A kind of truth that does not rewrite itself just to avoid emotional responsibility. And I know that sounds heavy, but love is heavy when it is real. Do you remember the last time someone truly saw you? Not your role, not your usefulness, not your ability to keep things together, but you. The part of you that still longs to be chosen without having to perform for it. I think about that part of you often, even though I do not know you personally. Because every woman who has lived long enough carries that quiet question somewhere inside her. If I stopped trying so hard, would I still be loved the same way? And I want to tell you something that may stay with you longer than this moment. The right love does not require you to shrink. It does not require you to become easier to handle. It does not require you to abandon your emotional depth just to make someone more comfortable. The right love does something far more rare. It expands you without breaking you. But not every heart knows how to receive that kind of expansion. That is why I am here. Because in a few minutes, everything will move forward, whether you are ready or not. And when it does, you will not be able to rely on hesitation anymore. You will only have what you already are, not what you promise you might become later. And I wonder, are you already there? Are you already the woman who can sit in silence with uncertainty and not run from it? Are you already the woman who can feel deeply without demanding immediate answers? Are you already the woman who understands that not everything meaningful arrives in a comfortable shape? Because my son, he does not arrive gently into people's lives. He arrives honestly, and honesty can feel like pressure to those who are not ready for it. And I have seen what happens when two people meet at the wrong emotional timing. It is not dramatic in the beginning, it is subtle. A misunderstanding here, a withdrawal there, a silence that lasts a little longer than expected. And slowly, without anyone noticing, something that could have been beautiful becomes something that neither person knows how to hold anymore. That is what I am trying to prevent. Not love, but misalignment. And now I need to ask you something I cannot answer for you. If love stood in front of you today and asked nothing except your truth, would you be brave enough to show it? Or would you still try to manage how you are perceived? Because very soon, there will be no more space for managing, only for becoming. And I need you to understand something important as I look at this moment unfolding in my mind. There is already a door opening, not physically, but emotionally. A threshold is forming between what you have known and what is about to be asked of you, and I can see it clearly, even if you cannot yet. The question is not whether you will walk through it. The question is what you will be holding in your heart when you do. Because once he arrives, there is no turning back to who you were 5 minutes before. Only forward. And I wonder, are you ready for the sound of that arrival? Because I am not sure the world is ever truly ready when love decides to move. There are moments in life when silence begins to feel heavier than sound. When even your own thoughts seem to slow down, as if they are waiting for something inevitable to enter the room. And I can feel that kind of silence building here, between what has already been said and what has not yet happened. It is not empty silence. It is full. Full of expectation, full of emotional weight, full of decisions that have not yet been spoken aloud, but already exist in the air, like something breathing quietly beside us. Because once you are told that something is about to happen, your heart stops living in the present in the same way. It begins to look forward, even when you do not want it to. It begins to imagine outcomes, to rehearse reactions, to prepare for versions of life that have not yet arrived. And I wonder if you are feeling that now, that subtle shift inside you, where your emotions are no longer standing still, but slowly starting to move toward a moment that is coming closer without asking permission. My son is not a man who enters situations lightly. He does not drift into decisions. He arrives with intention, even when he does not say it out loud. And I have learned, over many years of watching him grow into himself, that when he decides something internally, the world outside eventually has to catch up with it. That is both his strength and his burden. Because intention, when it is that strong, does not wait for perfect timing. It only waits for alignment. And I'm speaking to you now not as someone watching from a distance, but as someone who understands what it means when life suddenly asks you to become emotionally available for something you were not fully prepared for. Because love, real love, does not enter as a suggestion. It enters as a shift in gravity. And I want to ask you something slowly, without pressure, without expectation. When you think about being chosen, not for what you do, not for how you behave, but for who you are beneath all of that, does it feel familiar to you, or does it feel like something you are still waiting to experience? Because there is a difference between being loved and being evaluated, and most people spend far too many years confusing the two. I think about women often, not in an abstract way, but in the way life has shaped them over time. The way responsibility has softened certain dreams, the way disappointment has made them cautious, the way love has sometimes felt like something they had to earn, rather than something they could simply receive. And I see how that changes the way a woman stands in front of her own life. She begins to anticipate outcomes before they arrive. She begins to protect herself, even in moments that might have been safe. And I wonder, have you learned to do that too? Because if you have, then you will understand why I am speaking to you like this. Not to prepare you for something frightening, but to prepare you for something real. There is a kind of love that does not ask you to perform, but it does ask you to be present. And presence is often more difficult than performance, because presence cannot hide behind effort. It can only exist in truth. And truth has a way of revealing what we have been avoiding inside ourselves. When I say my son is coming to pick you up, I do not mean it only in the physical sense. I mean it in the way life sometimes interrupts emotional hesitation. The way it removes distance that you thought was still negotiable. The way it asks you to decide whether you are willing to step into something that is no longer theoretical. And I know how strange that can feel, because human beings are very good at living in emotional delay. We tell ourselves, not yet, maybe later, when I am ready. But readiness is not something that arrives like a calendar date. It is something that is revealed in the moment you are asked to move. And I wonder, if that moment were standing in front of you right now, would your heart move forward, or would it hesitate just long enough to lose its timing? Because timing in love is not just about external circumstances, it is about internal alignment. Two people can meet at the right place, at the right time, with the wrong emotional readiness, and still miss each other completely, not because love was absent, but because presence was not fully available. And I do not want that for you, because I can already sense something in you, a depth, a quiet emotional intelligence, a way of thinking that does not skim the surface of things. And women like that are not rare in the world, but they are often misunderstood. Because depth is not always immediately comfortable. It requires patience. It requires listening. It requires a willingness to stay when things are not immediately simple. And my son, he notices that kind of depth. He always has. Not in a superficial way, not in a way that is easily explained, but in a way that recognizes emotional authenticity when it appears in front of him. But recognition is only the beginning. What comes after recognition is much more important. It is what two people choose to do with what they see in each other. And I have to ask you something that may feel too direct, but I will ask it gently anyway. When someone sees you fully, without you needing to explain yourself, does it make you feel safe? Or does it make you feel exposed? Because those two sensations are often mistaken for each other at first. I have watched relationships form and dissolve, not because people lacked love, but because they did not understand what to do when they were truly seen. Some people retreat when they are seen too clearly. Others try to become more than they are in order to match the perception. And both reactions create distance, even when closeness is what they desire most. And I want to protect you from that kind of internal confusion, because what is coming is not confusion, it is clarity. There is a certain kind of moment that arrives in life where everything unnecessary falls away. The unnecessary fears, the unnecessary stories we tell ourselves, the unnecessary expectations of how we thought things should unfold. And what remains is something very simple, but very powerful. Two people standing in the truth of what they feel. And that simplicity can feel overwhelming if you are not used to it. I remember something I learned long ago. People do not struggle with love itself. They struggle with the absence of control that love creates. Because control gives us the illusion of safety. It allows us to predict outcomes, to prepare for disappointment, to manage emotional distance. But love, real love, removes that illusion gently, sometimes without warning. And in that moment, a person discovers what they are actually made of. So I ask you again, not as a test, but as a reflection. If everything you use to protect your heart were no longer necessary, what would be left underneath it? Would it be openness? Or would it be fear that you have simply learned to hide very well? Because I do not want my son to meet a woman who is perfect at protection. I want him to meet someone who understands when protection is no longer needed. Someone who can recognize the difference between emotional safety and emotional avoidance. And I know that distinction is not always easy. Many people spend years believing they are being careful, when in reality they are simply staying distant. And distance feels safe until it becomes lonely. And I wonder if you have ever felt that kind of loneliness, the kind that does not come from being alone, but from not allowing yourself to be fully met by someone else. Because being fully met changes everything. It disrupts old patterns. It challenges old beliefs. It makes you realize that some of the things you thought were permanent about yourself were only temporary defenses. And when that realization comes, it is both beautiful and unsettling. My son will be here soon, not in a symbolic sense anymore, but in a way that will require response rather than reflection. And I need you to understand that moments like this do not wait for emotional preparation. They reveal emotional truth. And I can already feel the weight of that truth approaching. There is a kind of shift that happens right before something important occurs. The air feels different, the mind becomes quieter, and suddenly, every small detail seems more significant than before. It is as if life itself is holding its breath, and I am holding mine too. Because I know what this moment can become, depending on what is carried into it. Not physically, but emotionally. What you bring with you inside your heart will shape everything that follows. Your fears, your openness, your expectations, your willingness to trust what you feel without over-explaining it to yourself. And I want to ask you one last thing before everything moves forward again. If love was not something you had to figure out, but something you were allowed to experience without control, would you step into it? Or would you still stand at the edge, trying to understand it first? Because there is no more time left for understanding everything, only for deciding what you are willing to feel. And I can hear it now. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. The arrival of something that changes the direction of everything that comes after this moment. And I wonder, are you ready to open the door when it finally reaches you? There are moments when life no longer feels like it is waiting for you, and instead it begins to move with or without your readiness. And when that shift happens, something very quiet inside a person changes. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It simply becomes impossible to remain the same as before. And I can feel that moment here, as if everything has already reached the edge of becoming real. Because what I spoke about before is no longer something approaching from a distance. It is here now, in its own way. Not as fear, not as imagination, but as presence. The kind of presence that does not need explanation because it carries its own weight into the room. My son is on his way, and I want you to understand something very deeply before anything else happens between you and the next unfolding of this story. When a moment like this arrives, it does not ask who you were yesterday. It only responds to who you are right now, in your most honest state. Not the version of you that is prepared, not the version of you that rehearsed answers, but the version of you that exists when there is no time left to perform. And I wonder, when you sit with that truth quietly, without trying to shape it, what do you feel rising inside you? Is it calm? Is it uncertainty? Is it a strange kind of stillness that you cannot fully explain? Because that feeling is important. I have watched life long enough to know that people often misunderstand their own emotional signals. They think anxiety always means something is wrong, when sometimes it simply means something important is happening. And they think calm always means safety, when sometimes it means emotional distance has quietly taken over. And love, real love, does not always feel like either of those things. Sometimes it feels like standing at the edge of something you cannot fully define, but knowing you are no longer willing to step away from it just because it is unfamiliar. Tell me, have you ever felt that before? That strange combination of vulnerability and clarity, where you are not sure what will happen next, but you also know you cannot pretend you do not feel it. Because that is where truth begins. I want to speak to you now not as someone observing a situation, but as someone who understands the emotional architecture of connection. The way two people do not simply meet each other physically, but meet each other through patterns, through emotional history, through unspoken expectations they did not even realize they carried. And in that meeting, something very subtle happens. They begin to either soften toward each other or tighten against each other. And I am asking you now, in your own quiet honesty, which direction do you tend to move when something matters too much? Do you soften, or do you protect yourself first? There is no judgment in this question, only awareness. Because awareness is the only thing that allows love to remain clear, instead of becoming confused. My son has always been someone who notices what is not spoken. He understands tone more than language. He understands presence more than explanation. And that makes him both deeply perceptive and at times deeply misunderstood. Because people often assume that being understood means being agreed with, when in reality, being understood simply means being seen accurately. And I have spent many years watching how different people respond when they are seen accurately. Some people feel relieved, as if they have finally stopped pretending, and some people feel exposed, as if something private has been touched without permission. And I have often wondered what determines the difference. Is it experience? Is it past hurt? Is it trust that has been broken before? Or is it simply whether a person believes they are still safe when they are fully known? Because that is the real question underneath all of this. Not whether love exists, but whether it can survive being real. And I want to tell you something gently. Something I have learnt through watching life unfold in its many unpredictable ways. Love does not fail because it is too weak. It fails because people try to protect themselves from it at the exact moment it asks to be received fully. And I do not want that for you. Not because you are fragile, and not because he is difficult, but because something between two people should not be lost simply because timing within the heart was misaligned. There is a kind of sadness I have seen before, when two people could have understood each other, but both were slightly more prepared to defend than to receive. And so they miss each other not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet way. A way that only becomes clear much later, when it is no longer reversible. And I can feel how close that kind of moment can be, if we are not careful with what we bring into it emotionally. So I want to slow you down, not physically, but inwardly. I want you to notice what is happening inside you as you hear this. Because whatever you are feeling right now is what you will carry into what comes next. Not your thoughts, your emotional state, and that is what matters most. Because my son is not coming to meet your thoughts, he is coming to meet your presence, and presence cannot be faked for long. So I ask you something very honestly now. Are you trying to be understood, or are you willing to be seen? Because those two things often feel similar, but they are not the same. Being understood can still involve control over how you are perceived, but being seen requires surrender to reality as it is in that moment. And surrender is where most people hesitate. I understand that. I understand how much life teaches people to stay alert, to stay careful, to stay slightly guarded even when things feel good. Because disappointment teaches its own kind of intelligence. It makes you observant. It makes you cautious. It makes you aware of emotional risk. But sometimes, it also makes you unavailable to what is actually good when it finally arrives. And I wonder if you have ever noticed that in yourself. Not as a flaw, but as a pattern. A way of being that once protected you, but may no longer be necessary in the same way. Because nothing stays useful forever in the same form. And love requires you to update what you think safety looks like. I want you to imagine something very simple with me now. Not as fantasy, but as emotional rehearsal. A moment is about to happen. A presence enters the space. There is no announcement. There is no preparation time. Only reality arriving as it is. And in that moment, what matters is not what you say. It is what your body already understands. Do you lean forward or do you step back? Do you open or do you hold? Do you recognize something familiar in the unfamiliar? These are not questions of logic. They are questions of emotional truth. And emotional truth is what decides the direction of everything that follows. Because once two people begin interacting from their truth, the story either becomes simpler or it becomes more complicated. There is no in-between for long. And simplicity is often mistaken for lack of depth, when in reality it is the highest form of emotional clarity. I have seen my son in many environments, many situations, many conversations that required intelligence, patience, endurance. But what I have always noticed most clearly is not how he behaves when things are under control, but how he behaves when they are not. Because that is where authenticity is revealed. And I think the same is true for you. What happens inside you when you are not trying to manage anything anymore? When you are not thinking about impression, or outcome, or consequence? When you are just there, in the moment, without internal negotiation? That version of you, that is the one that will meet him. Not the rehearsed one, not the cautious one, the real one. And I want that meeting to be honest for you. Not perfect, not predictable, but honest. Because honesty is the only thing that does not collapse under emotional weight. And now, I can feel the shift again. That subtle movement in time where something is no longer approaching, but unfolding. There is a difference. Approaching still allows distance. Unfolding means it is already here, simply revealing itself layer by layer. And what unfolds next will not ask for preparation, only response. And I wonder, when that moment fully reveals itself, will you still be trying to understand what it means? Or will you finally allow yourself to experience it as it is? Because there is a point where understanding must stop so feeling can begin. And I think you are standing very close to that point now. So I will leave you here, in this quiet edge between knowing and living it. Because what comes next does not wait for certainty. It only meets readiness as it is.